Hello, everybody. My name is Kale, also known as Dino S'more on Roblox, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our Level Up Roundtable on live operations, featuring Ruddev Ethan and XO of Rudimentality, and Roblox's own Game Insights game designer Aaron, aka Breakfast Candy. Aaron, over to you.
Hey everybody. Hi, Elle and Ethan. Thank you so much for joining us. So to start off, how about you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
My name is Ethan, also known as Ruddev Ethan on the platform. I'm the lead game designer and product manager for Bad Business. I started out as a player on the platform in 2011, but grew kind of naturally into developer over the years that followed. I have been part of Rudimentality, or what we now just call Ruddev, for about 6 years. And in that time, I've worked on games such as Strobe 2, Cannoneers, and Rudev's Battle Royale, as well as now Bad Business.
I'm Elle. I go by XO on the platform. I've been around for about 10 years now. I joined in 2010 as a player as well. And around 2014, 2015, I started getting into game development. I've worked on a bunch of different projects. I worked on Stealth, Polygons, Cannoneers, Rudev's Battle Royale, and now I'm the lead programmer and systems designer for Bad Business.
Fantastic. You guys have been around for a long time then, old pros. So for anyone who hasn't played Bad Business, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Bad Business is a casual movement-based first-person shooter on Roblox that puts a large focus on player expression. So we have a ton of both loadout customization and player customization that we have successfully kind of managed to build up over the past couple of years.
Very cool. And how long has that game been live?
We began open development of the game in June 2019, where we made decisions on the game's direction based on community feedback, but we transitioned our product into a more traditional LiveOps style in the following August of that year.
Okay. So we are here today to talk about LiveOps. So how would you define LiveOps and what that means specifically for Bad Business?
To us, LiveOps is about delivering consistently high quality content to users in such a way that benefits both our development team and the players. So by utilizing LiveOps, we can grow our studio at the pace we desire. With LiveOps, when done well, we can reduce crunch to a minimum by building up backlogs and forward scheduling, as well as it guarantee a level of security that only periodical releases can offer. But it also benefits the players a ton. We effectively are able to guarantee the fun of the game will be carried out through longer than many of our competitors can, which makes them feel, or which makes the players feel like their money is being far more well spent than in our game compared to others.
Okay, so you feel like your LiveOps strategy has contributed to the success of the game long term?
Yes.
So when you first started doing LiveOps, is there anything that you now know that you wish you knew back then?
The biggest thing is that we didn't have a content backlog back then. So that required us to create an internal schedule that we could easily shift around when planning out future updates, because development is really tough and flexibility is really key in managing rapidly changing situations between contractors. And so by creating a content backlog that we could always pick at, basically, we always had new stuff that could come out at any time.
You don't have to work so hard to stay on that content treadmill and keep ahead of your players.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we have an image for this one, but how often do you release smaller updates as part of your content cadence?
For us, we wanted to distinguish ourselves from our competitors in what we treated as smaller content. So our method is by no means the only way of going about it, but we release about 2 to 3 playable content items during every one of those updates, which could range from a new weapon, a new map, a new set of levels to grind out, or some other new feature that's forward-facing and noticeable to the average player. By releasing content that is often playable to users on launch if they have dedicated time to the game already, or to users willing to pay to skip that grind, we have a cycle of excitement that is available to us at any given time. This also creates a cycle of increased earnings and increased engagement as well, which creates that stability within the money our game is bringing in. We also, This image here is just showing the list of the items that would come out in an average update. So 2 to 3 playable content items, including there is a few weapons, and then a couple of other things like bug fixes and quality of life improvements. We also have a dynamic shop system that allows us to switch out smaller content daily and weekly. So there we have our featured weekly outfits, as well as dedicated pages for our game passes. We also have a rotating shop there that is in another menu that changes daily. So this allows us to switch out our smaller content in those time periods, so daily and weekly. But our primary content cadence comes about in bi-weekly updates, so every 2 weeks on Fridays. Ultimately, these smaller releases are the bread and butter of the game's profit generation, but delivering constant content to users in varied enough ways also results in an effective way to implement ideas from the community frequently, creating goodwill between the developers and the players. So this is an example of just one of the many different types of these content cadence updates that we would do, where we added in new mythical daggers for the users to unlock. That being said, none of this matters in the long term if major updates are also not frequently being worked on.
Got it. Very true. So good segue for bad business. How often do you release major updates?
For bad business, we are currently actively working on a major update that we hope to get out before the end of the year. But prior to this one, which has been unfortunately a bit of a large break, it was the attachments update, which introduced a fundamental new addition to the core gameplay loop. This is a picture of the attachments update. Generally, we try and get major updates out like once every quarter, but unfortunately, we just haven't been keeping up to that as much as we hoped that we would have been able to. The attachments update allowed players to experience the game in a new way that they hadn't before, but it also still built on the fundamentals of Bad Business's design and our devotion to giving players more customization than our competitors. Originally, we only offered that through the character outfit system, but now players have the option to effectively make their gun their own as well. Now the attachment system became such a core part of Bad Business that it's really difficult to imagine it without it. Every smaller content update is affected by its addition, with each new gun requiring a full set of attachments to it, which created a new challenge for us as developers to work through, but ultimately paid off in creating a level of design complexity that our players really enjoy. These updates also can be more than just new features. Similar to the smaller updates, we find value in varying the types of updates that come out. So this is a picture of our roadmap for this year. Unfortunately, not everything has managed to come out in this year, but it shows that although sometimes we have new feature updates like the 3.0 update, which includes new game modes, we also sometimes will do large content-driven updates similar to the attachments update or the new set of game passes that are going to be coming out in 3.0 as well. This cycle helps generate outside interest or returning interest by offering players new content in order for them to check out all of the unique things that were added to the game since the last time that they played.
So you just mentioned variety, and I think that's a really key point. How important is that both for your players to get a variety of new content and things to try, but also for your development team to keep things interesting and have new things to work on all the time?
Yeah, variety is huge. Originally, we struggled with this as well, where we were kind of stuck in a loop of releasing variations of the same content every week. And not only, like you said, did that lead to the community kind of dropping off at times, but our developers in our team also were starting to get burnt out much faster. Whereas now that we balance out a lot of the different types of content that we're adding in the game and vary this so drastically between updates, both our players and our employees are much happier.
Great. So you also brought up your attachment system. Did that change your content cadence at all, introducing that new system and having new types of content to release?
Yeah, for a really long time, we were doing weekly updates, actually. So we were adding in this new content every single week. But after the attachments update, because of the added complexity, we realized that we had to move to bi-weekly updates, which was a good lesson to be learned, that you can't just add in new stuff and then have it just be finished. Anything in a live service game is going to be added on and added on over time.
Got it. So that attachment system increased the complexity of the assets you were creating and how expensive they were?
Yeah, it took much longer for us to implement one gun into the game, for example, because instead of just having to deal with one model, we had to deal with 30 models.
Got it. Were there any advantages, though, to adding that attachment system?
Yeah, we see that just in general, people are way more excited about even just adding in really small universal attachments, basically. So it allowed us to also pad out our content in certain ways by creating some easier stuff for us to make, but things that are very rewarding for players to receive.
All right, sounds like a good update overall, and good adjustment to your schedule as well.
It's much more sustainable now.
Yeah, that's important just for team health as well. So are there any other kinds of updates that you release? You know, you mentioned major updates and content cadence. Is there anything else that you do?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we also do these smaller content pushes through dynamic shops in daily and weekly content cadences. And that's really important to us because it results in really lively discussions about new outfits and stuff like that in our Discord channels. Even when we're not like doing a huge update that week, we still have people like gathering and wondering, oh, what's going to be in the shop today, or what's going to be in the shop tomorrow, and stuff like that. They also are constantly like sharing the outfits that they're making and stuff, which is really cool. We also have a long history of doing holiday events in Bad Business, which often included cross promotion opportunities. This was really big for us to get new players into the game, even years after we had published it for the first time. And we also do bug fixes pretty commonly, but unless they're absolutely necessary, they're usually pretty invisible in larger patches. We will give certain ones spotlight in times where we could possibly utilize some of the community goodwill that would generate. But in general, we try and focus our forward-facing community, like our content cadence, on actual content rather than just bug fixes and stuff like that.
And I thought it was a really interesting point that you made about how even your smaller content cadence or content releases can, you know, generate buzz among your community. Is that something that you leverage now? You think, okay, let's release maybe this type of content because that will really get them excited, anything like that?
Yeah, we'll talk about this later, but in terms of community feedback, this also helps kind of solidify people's understanding of how the outfits and how these items work in the game as well. Because at first, maybe it was a little bit more, I don't know, there were less rules attached to the outfits that were in the game. There was less precedent set. Whereas over time, because we've continued to add in, because people have continued to collaborate with each other by making these different combinations, it's allowed them to also be able to give us better feedback.
Very nice. All right, so we've talked about all the different kinds of releases that you do now. Switching gears a little bit, what does your creative process look like for LiveOps, and how does it differ now than pre-launch?
Well, creatively, our team differs a lot from person to person, which is something that LiveOps enables us to do. Before launching our game, we tried to keep things really honed in and efficient. But now that we have the freedom to work with a bunch of talented people on the platform that we get to work with, we try and encourage them to take the time that they need on their content while we maintain that backlog developed from other various contractors over a long period of time. This kind of gives them that safety to create some of the things that they really want to make. And because these releases are really consistent, we also gather really great feedback from the community, which we implement into that process, like I was mentioning. After seeing how the game's updates work for the past couple of years, the community as a whole has gotten pretty good at suggesting things that are not outside of the scope of what we can do. So not only in the case of the outfits, but also in the case of new weapons and new features. People will even structure their suggestions in the way that our like weapons will be announced, sort of. So people have essentially a template to go off of because of the LiveOps. And then we also understood from the start that Bad Business wanted to distinguish itself from the competitors by being able to deliver consistent quality updates to our players with a fairly ethical monetization scheme. So this turned out to be really necessary as well, due to the fact that we released the game initially with so little content. So these weekly contents or weekly updates originally were the best option, but after years of that stress, we switched to bi-weekly updates, and we've been feeling really sustainable ever since in terms of our creative process as well.
All right, so in terms of like pre-launch, how did that look in comparison? You know, you mentioned that you hadn't built up that backlog yet. Now you've done that. So, you know, was your team different? How are your processes different then?
Yeah, well, before launch, it was only Elle and I actually working on the game. We were full-time working during the accelerator program at Roblox HQ, which was a fantastic time. And that being said, though, it was really difficult. We didn't work 40-hour work weeks. We worked more than that. We were really stressed all of the time. And we, by the end of it, we're pretty burnt out overall. And so slowly over time, when we started to grow the team, we knew that we didn't want to like subject other people to that sort of stress. And so that's kind of been like the impetus for a lot of these changes that we've made.
Well, I'm so glad that you're in a more sustainable place now. And that is a learning process because every game is different. So even if you've done it a million times, like figuring out what that looks like in LiveOps can be really tough. So are there any kinds of production processes that you use to help keep on track? Like, do you have a roadmap or task trackers?
I'm a really big fan of Notion, which is a project and task management software. It's really user-friendly and I can access it anywhere. I have something that I call the content log, which I think that there is actually an image for. Yeah. Well, in this image, it's called the update log, but it's called a content log. And it's just a long checklist of updates, essentially, that I keep track of. They're in chronological order, generally. And each of these updates listed have their own page that goes with them that detail specifics on the update, update logs that I posted regarding it, and just like general work checklists that I used. They're also all tagged with a bunch of different categories to easily distinguish the differences between content cadence releases and major updates, as well as the type of content needed and the members of the team working on it, so I can make sure that there's always something for people to be doing. Updates here get planned out a few months in advance. Like, for example, right now I have up until February of next year planned out, but none of that will stay the same. It's constantly updated because, like I mentioned before, that's kind of the benefit of having a LiveOps situation. Aside from this, I just try to communicate with my workers as much as I can. I have a development server where community moderators and power users can get invited to interact directly with us and influence future updates. And many of our contractors will go there to get feedback on things rather than depending on me directly. So this creates a work environment that's really friendly and open and creative as well. And it also is basically the best thing that we have found in order to efficiently develop content.
Awesome. So you said that you plan out months in advance. What prompted you to make a plan that is that long?
Honestly, it's just the amount of stuff that we want to do with the game. In a lot of ways, I have kind of just like gathered some of the feedback from the community and then consolidated it and then tried to figure out where we can fit it into places as well. We also have a public Trello that we use. I don't have an image of that necessarily. This also constantly gets updated. But this is mostly made up of player suggestions, just stuff that we can kind of get down on paper essentially so that we can start thinking about it if we want to add it.
So that does lead to my next question is, how do you go about prioritizing all of those suggestions and getting them on your roadmap?
That is a good question. And it is generally just like kind of how I'm feeling, because I will try and figure out both what is actually available to us in the backlog, what the people on our team are feeling like they want to be doing, because I'm not going to force people to do things that they don't want to do when we already have so much room for flexibility. And then it's also just what I'm seeing is talked about in the community a lot. For example, this week, actually, we switched our updates around a bunch because of some personal stuff, but then also just because the community started to like get on an issue where we hadn't we haven't like released a new weapon of a certain sort in a really long time. So we decided, you know, whatever, we'll prioritize this type of weapon this week so we can get this out, build up that goodwill a little bit, and then keep doing our thing.
Got it. All right. So that's a nice combination of like team input and your players as well. Do you use any analytics to inform some of those decisions as well?
Many of our workers who naturally want to improve the game and their own work will seek out analytics, but we don't strictly use analytics as a baseline mechanism for accessing or for assessing people's performance or anything like that. So for specifically, we track through PlayFab, usage rates of weapons and attachments, map voting rates, various spending rates, etc. This is an example of the map voting. So we can have like a graph that shows us exactly like how popular certain maps are in the voting blocks. And so an example of this is for map development. One of our contractors is constantly seeking these out because he wants to try and analyze what the community doesn't like about some of his recent maps, or what they particularly like about some of his recent maps, and maybe what he can do to improve on them for the next map that he works on. But that all being said, analytics are really tricky, and interpreting them can often lead to too much of a focus on things that are not really that important. And so even though they're useful in very specific situations, we try not to suffocate like our creators with them necessarily. So we just leave them open to people if they're interested, but otherwise I don't really put too much stress into them.
Yeah, it's fair. It is easy to fall into maybe paying too much attention to the analytics and having that drive everything, as opposed to letting some creativity happen and intuition. And it's important to have a balance of both. But yeah, glad that information is available where it's useful. You did mention briefly that you do holiday updates, and we do have holidays coming up, so it'd be fun to talk about that a little bit. Do you change your strategy at all around the holidays? Like, what do your updates look like for that time?
Well, for us, holidays are pretty great, and they fit snugly within our biweekly content updates. So they'll arrive a week prior to the holiday generally, and they'll also often end the week after. We put them in between our regular content updates because they rely heavily on previously published content and therefore do not warrant like a 2-week wait that we usually subject people to. So for Bad Business, our holidays consist of giving people a few free items just for playing, but then also thematically changing maps. And this is an example on screen of a holiday shop where we just sell all of the previously released holiday items as well. We have kind of lacked consistency in our holiday updates, but that is in large part because as the game grew and as our team grew, just things changed. So holidays were always a place of experimentation for our team, both for creativity and general update scheduling. And when we were doing weekly updates, they look different than they do to us now. So next year, we plan to release 5 holiday themed updates, but this number is really arbitrary. There's no right or wrong amount to do it. I think that if you release them too often, you will run the risk of them feeling a bit overdone, but releasing them too infrequently results in lost profits. So it's all about finding a balance there.
Got it. So there's a certain amount of holiday content that maybe players expect, but if you overdo it, it all starts to feel special and therefore nothing is.
Yeah. And I want to mention as well that although you can kind of pick from the roster of holidays that are already available to you, one really, really impactful thing that you can do is create your own holiday for the game. So either through like an anniversary event or through just like a story related like lore drop or something like that. Those sorts of things can kind of drive up that excitement a lot more than competing with 20 other like St. Patrick's Day updates do.
Love that. I feel like that would really make your world feel alive as well, to have its own special events in the game. And there are certainly times of the year where there's kind of a drought of holidays. So that's a great way to like fill in with some extra content. So that's a great idea. I think we are ready for a Q&A break. Do we have any questions, Kale?
We do. Give me 1 second. All right. First question. What data do you look at to determine if your live ops was successful?
Usually we will look at our like earnings data specifically. This is just a matter of kind of figuring out our average, like our baseline income during the weekdays, and then kind of incorporating the average that we would earn on weekends, and sort of comparing between updates how that's doing and how consistent that is. I feel like if you're doing live ops well, you should eventually, I don't know how soon necessarily, I don't know how soon we saw it, but eventually you'll see things start to stabilize and the graphs will sort of go in patterns essentially. And that's kind of what we're looking at. Another big thing though is engagement. So the amount of playtime in the game is really huge for live ops as well, because ultimately it's about getting people to play longer rather than just getting them to maybe spend more. And so when we see our updates are increasing the average playtime, that's usually a good sign for us as well.
We also look at like long-term engagement statistics, stuff like our day one retention, our like week one or month one, and then also stuff like new users in the game.
All right, next question. How do you handle exploiting, specifically determining if a bullet hit was legal or not? OS.time value comparison.
Exploiting is obviously like a big issue that we have to deal with. For like bullets specifically, it's a lot of different checks. Obviously, we do like, do you have enough ammo? Are you reloading right now? You know, sort of state checks, and then position validation, right? Make sure they're firing from where their character is. Make sure all of the like directions are normalized. And then we do like geometry checks when they're hitting stuff. For the most part, like hit detection is handled by the client just because that feels the best for our players. We kind of favor the feel over like perfect security. And then obviously we have a litany of like other client-side checks for known exploits. We have server-side checks for known exploits. It's a whole process.
All right. Next question. What are your thoughts on no deploy Fridays? How do you deploy updates on, say, the weekend without asking employees or contractors to work overtime on the weekend in case something goes wrong in production?
So there's a couple of ways that you can do this, but for us specifically, we do deploy our updates on Fridays. Generally, that being said, we also try and basically take the day off after we deploy our update, regardless of when it came out on Fridays. So we kind of do like 4-day work weeks-ish almost with it. So Fridays aren't meant to be very stressful. And so that's kind of the origin, I feel, of no deploy Fridays, like the purpose of it. But I don't think that just changing where the day is necessarily always helps. So deploying updates on the weekend or on like late on Fridays or something like that. I just don't think that we should ever be asking our contractors to be working with us right when that's happening. I feel like that's kind of part of being a manager, is creating that security and that space essentially in time between when their content is coming out and when they actually needed to be working on it. And so generally, if you like miss, or if we miss a Friday update, if we end up wanting to put it out on the weekend, it would only be a thing where me or Elle would, because we've kind of signed up for that essentially by running the team. But if we ever had other people need to do stuff as well, we never force them to crunch or anything like that. I just think that, like, instead of giving hard dates for a lot of things, in terms of like future updates for the community, I think pretty often the best you can do is just establish a pattern of updating and have them trust that stuff will come out. Even if it doesn't come out that Friday, they know that new stuff is coming. So it doesn't matter that it got delayed past the weekend, sort of.
This is also like a great reason to have a backlog of content, because like if one of our contractors is like working on a gun and it's taking them longer than expected, it's not like our next update is going to be delayed because of that. We can always bring in like a new gun, do like new attachments, stuff like that. We always have other content that can cover for those sort of internal delays.
Let's see. Next question. How important is it to update weekly or bi-weekly instead of monthly? Are smaller, more frequent updates more effective than bigger, more spaced out updates?
We have found that our bi-weekly updates are doing better than our weekly updates were. So I would not automatically assume that smaller, more frequent updates are better. I think that early on in development, it can help a lot to update frequently, though, to build up that initial community trust in the game. Like I mentioned, you want to establish that pattern so that people know that new stuff will be coming out. And yeah, that's, yeah.
Let's see, you kind of already touched on this, but maybe you can add some more color. A lot of FPS games on Roblox suffer from cheaters. Do you have a way to detect if someone is exploiting, like wall hack, aimbot, flying, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no like one size fits all solution for that. I usually spend time every like month or so just to go through and download a bunch of exploits on like dedicated like exploit computer that we have. That's just sort of and then just like work on ways to defeat those exploits. A lot of like for FPS games specifically, there's a lot of like exploit hubs, which is just a long script that has a bunch of exploits for like a bunch of different games. Those are usually like copy and pasted between each other. So if you can find a way to just like, if you can find one of them that's like has a readable source and you can find like a way to detect it there, it's pretty, it's not easy, but you can usually like do a pretty good job of finding ways to detect exploits.
Okay, the last question we have, what was your top player count and was it during a holiday?
Our top player count was 33,000 players, which is very far from our normal amount. And it wasn't during a holiday, but it was during like a cross promotional event, like a holiday. It was during the Ready Player 2 cross promotion event.
Let me just double check. That's all we have.
All right, thanks for the great questions, everyone, and the great answers too. So I have a follow-up to that one. How often do you participate in events like that?
As much as we can. Like literally anytime that something pops up that we can get our hands on and we have the time to do that. Like we aren't super busy with doing a major update because that's where a lot of that time will come from pretty often. If we're free there, then we try and do it any chance that we can get.
So why is that something that's such a priority for you?
I touched on this earlier, but these are really, really good opportunities to get people to get new players in your game, obviously, but then also to get people who would never have checked out your game again, but will now because of this promotional event. That's one of the most difficult things that you can overcome with LiveOps, is getting people who kind of in their head already have their first impression of your game and have decided that they don't want to play it anymore. Even though your game may have changed drastically over the past however many years, these people will still hold that same opinion essentially until you can get them in your game and prove them wrong. And I mean, sometimes you can't do that either, but that's where these cross promotional opportunities will really, really help in getting those people back in as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's something that you're absolutely right is so important, is re-engaging those lapsed players. And that's a great point about using events to kind of re-engage them, get them excited about the game again. So thank you for that. So talking about community again, we did talk about that briefly before, but what are all the ways that you go about interacting with your community?
Well, our social media presence is only as big as we can personally manage, but we plan to expand it as our team grows and we eventually bring in like a dedicated community manager. Right now, we primarily communicate on Twitter and Discord. So Twitter for us has always been a really easy way of getting quick notifications out to people that care about the game's updates, as well as some update leaks. But comprehensive information is really difficult to convey here because of obviously the word count. So as you can see, we just give like a really, really quick rundown and then also post like the thumbnail for our game's update. But we do like see quite a bit of engagement and we've seen it consistently grow over time as well. We also use specific channels within our Discord server in order to give this kind of more difficult, comprehensive information to people. So earlier I showed off the update log that exists there, but we also have a bunch of announcement and discussion channels that happen there. Tweets for us get sent out a couple times a week. We would like to do it more often, but I've heard that some people have success like tweeting out every day, multiple times a day, but I don't live on the internet like that, so I can't do that. Discord posts are far less consistent, and they can range from like huge conversations with community members about things to radio silence over like a week. It kind of just depends on what people are feeling like at that time in our team, and if they want to talk to the community about the thing that they're working on right then.
Got it. All right. So as much as you can, you do, and thinking about trying to maybe ramp up a little bit more. Nice. So when you're talking to your community, how valuable is their feedback in your development process?
It's essential in the development of our game, but we also really, really value that creative independence that we can give to our contractors. So every piece of feedback has a tag attached to it, basically, that states the developers have the final say in the matter. This is an example of the feedback and suggestions channel that exists in our Discord, where people are really frequently talking about new stuff being added into the game, as well as updates that I have I've mentioned. these are like leaks that I have put into chat prior that continue to sort of like circle around the community and get different like suggestions to those future updates as a result. But ultimately, I think that it's really good to have our creatives on our team willing to experiment and try new things that maybe don't always, or maybe they aren't always like the most well received by the community, but they offer opportunities for those people to grow. So even though that feedback from the community is really important to us, I still want to give the freedom to our contractors that helps them kind of stay with us as well.
No, that makes total sense. It's always nice to have some creative freedom, and your players only know what they want in terms of what they already are familiar with, maybe, and it can help to throw out something new that they're not expecting, and maybe they'll respond really well to it, maybe they won't, but that's how you learn, and how you can keep them interested as well with that variety, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'll mention that a lot of our workers know better about what they want to be making than anyone else does, especially in terms of, like I mentioned, that variety. They know how to change things up, even if they're doing stuff that is relatively similar to what they had been doing the week before. They know how to make it feel different for them and more beneficial for them as well.
Awesome. So you have talked about, putting out tweets and things like that. What is the value for you in messaging those updates to your players?
We do hype up our updates prior to release occasionally, but we haven't had the opportunity to do that super often. One benefit, like I mentioned, of the consistent content releases is that the community picks up on those patterns and they begin to, for better or worse, sometimes expect content on dates, even without them being announced necessarily. So we rarely will release like a specific release date for something, but people know they're working on this gun. It looks like it's pretty done. It's in the testing place, and we have an update coming up this Friday, so we can probably assume that it's going to be coming in. The way Bad Business communicates our updates, though, is usually through those informal discussions in Discord channels, as well as the leaks being done ahead of time, so that people know that it entered the backlog and is ready to come out. We do announce our updates on Twitter, though, and in our Discord when they come out, and we like on our Discord, we'll ping everyone for that. That's just like a way to get a surge of new players in right when that update comes out as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point too. If you just release something and don't say anything about it, then you kind of rely on the community to discover it themselves, right?
Yeah, I forgot to mention this before, but we do also change our game icon through every single one of our content cadence updates. This is, for us, it's worked. I haven't heard that this has worked for everyone, though. I've heard that some people, their communities like the more like consistent brand of a consistent game icon. But for us, that's one of the ways that we get people in as well, is that we do variations essentially of our template icon, and then like highlight the new content in those icons as well.
Got it. There's probably something in there about the content of the icon and how similar it is to what players are expecting the game to be, and probably some things to dig into and learn there, but that's really fascinating. Cool. All right. So you involve your players, you tell them updates are coming. How involved are they in content development itself, like UGC content or polls asking them what they want, things like that? Do you do any of that?
We haven't really that much. This is just kind of a side effect of us really valuing that creative freedom, though. For the contractors, we want to make the space for them before we're focused on giving that space for random people in our community as well.
It's fair. So you put out all this content, you've got this backlog, thankfully, that you can draw on now. How much has your team grown over time to accommodate your schedule and what you're putting out for your players?
Well, like I mentioned, we started out with just Elle and I, and now I believe we have over 10 people. I think that we are up to 11, but because of the nature of contractors, we have people who have consistent jobs in other games or in other industries as well, that sometimes they'll make stuff and be helping us update the game like every content cadence update. And then sometimes they'll kind of go off and do their own thing for a few months. So that number shifts around quite a bit as well. But yeah, we're up to, I believe, 11 or 12 now.
How do you decide like when it's time to ramp up and add a new person to your team?
That is just coming from listening from the other team members and figuring out like their productivity, how they're doing, see how their stress levels are, see how their just general enjoyment levels are. But also, I think that sometimes we have like the perspective in like small business development to constantly grow. And I don't think that that's always necessary. I think that we have displayed that we can sort of keep our team at a core of people that are pretty stagnant or pretty consistent, but then build out a constantly changing contractor base around us as well. And then that core, I would genuinely just hire people, both when we have the flexibility to, which we're working on, but then also just for people that seem like they would bring a lot to not only the game, but also the team itself.
That's awesome. Great to have freedom to hire opportunity hires as well. When you are looking to add to your team, how do you go about doing that?
Well, right now we kind of just talk amongst our like developer discords and amongst our friends, and we'll post in there and we'll be like, hey, does anyone need work? We also post though on the dev forum. We really do value though the personal connections between our workers, and so getting people that our friends recommend personally is just really important to us. But I do want to get us on the Talent Hub. We haven't posted anything on the Talent Hub yet.
Cool. All right, and you've got Bad Business, which is taking up obviously a significant chunk of your time. Are there any thoughts of bringing on another game?
Yeah, that's an like very active part of our plans. We did the accelerator program earlier this year, where we worked on another project, but we just have a ton of stuff that we want to do. Ultimately, we do feel that we need another game in order to grow our team more and give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of what we want to create. And so that is like a really big focus of ours right now, but it's a difficult process balancing where that time can come from exactly, especially when you're working on a major update for another game.
Makes sense. All right, exciting times though. All right, I think we are ready for another Q&A break, Kale, if we have more questions.
We do. All right, first question. How do you maintain a focused vision for the game while still incorporating community feedback and creative input from different team members?
This is a really good question. I think that, like I mentioned before, LiveOps creates sort of a precedent though, and that focused vision, although it's not inherently bad, I don't think is always necessary, or like very focused of a vision. Bad Business, for example, it's a little bit eclectic in its design style, but it works as a result in that we have so many different talented people kind of all doing their own take on the game. So we make sure that the people that are working amongst us know what the game is and have played it before, and that they can interact with our community well. But then just through that natural process of collaboration, I think pretty often you'll see that the community already knows, or the worker already knows what that vision is, maybe better than even you do.
Okay. Speaking of vision, when adding someone to the team, is it more important to have someone that is technically skilled or more aligned with the vision of your game?
I would definitely say someone who's more aligned with the vision of your game. I would not hire people exclusively for technical reasons. Generally, like if you do that, there's a reason why you really need to. But otherwise, yeah, it's a lot about figuring out like the team culture and balancing that, I think, a lot more than the literal skills of the person. Also, I'll mention that this isn't like very common for the games industry, but we really value people who are staying with us for a long period of time as well, who are not just leaving after a certain period of time. And my brain went blank. I don't remember where I was going with that.
Elle, did you have any input on the technical versus keeping?
Yeah, I guess I'll just use this to chime in. It's very important to us to like give people a place that they can like grow their skills. Like we don't need to like hire someone who has the like highest technical achievement, because we want to be able to provide them a place to like to grow their skills. I think that's like very important to the sort of long-term success of our like company, is bringing on people not just because they're good, but because they can become even better.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to. That's where I was going. Thank you. Was it's just that people, we want them to stay with us for a while, and so as a result, we kind of don't have any like holdups if someone isn't super experienced in something. We want to give them that time to do that.
How do you balance growing your team with keeping a manageable workflow? So I guess like, does hiring more people make it more complicated? And how do you manage that?
It does make it more complicated. I mean, I used to not do any like manager work at all. I used to be entirely like creative, and now manager and design work is my entire job. So it takes a lot of time in order to balance all of the different people's work that you're doing, or that you're like, I don't know, that you're designing for them to do. But yeah, it also does like alleviate some of the creative, you know, strongholds, I guess, that you can't get past. So it's honestly just I don't know. It's a mix. It's a balance.
Yeah, give and take. All right. You mentioned you want to do more with social and community engagement. What are your plans for implementing this?
Specifically, our plans are to bring someone on board that can do like dedicated community management. I think that it's just like, it's something that like manager work is a full-time job if you want to do it to the best that you can. And in order for us to grow out on other platforms as well, for example, we really want to like get on TikTok, because TikTok is like really fun, and we've seen our game played on there and it seems cool, and people like it. So I think that it would be really cool to expand our content creation like onto there as well. But like I mentioned, that just takes like someone dedicated to it. So that's kind of where we're going with that.
Okay. Do you have any tips for creating a successful live ops? General tips.
General tips, like I mentioned before, definitely create a content backlog, but then within that, create like an internal schedule that isn't beholden to anyone, is just there to reference, because pretty often you'll say that you want to do something, and then a couple of days later, you have completely forgotten that you wanted to do it ever. So by like actually writing it down and putting it in the schedule, you have the opportunity to keep that on track as well.
All right, that is all the questions we have for now.
Thank you, Kale. All right, so we're going to start wrapping up. Given how long you guys have been doing this, what have you learned along the way that you'd like to share?
The biggest takeaway that I have from all of this is that the crunch game dev cycle that we see in the industry to make a lot of games is just not sustainable in live ops. It slowly creeps its way into every aspect of your life otherwise. So breaks need to be given to people, independence needs to be had, and pressure needs to be kept at a minimum. The environment that you have people work in needs to feel comforting for all involved, or else it won't feel that way to anybody. And ultimately, this is like the most important thing at keeping stuff coming out at a consistent rate.
Very true. How about you, El?
Let's see. I think, yeah, I definitely agree. Having like a very sort of relaxed environment is definitely a big part of it. And then also, I think self-discipline is still very important, because if you give yourself too much of like a relaxed environment, you're not going to hit your deadlines and stuff like that. So self-discipline, but still keep it chill.
Totally, and that self-discipline works both ways. It can be easy to get really excited about something and just work yourself too hard as well. So kind of finding that right balance.
Yeah, and I think that your people that are working for you are also going to look at the person that they were hired by specifically and look at their habits and see how they work. So if you find yourself like constantly crunching and stuff, even though you're not having other people crunch, you may be letting on the impression that they should be. And so even like subtle parts of the environment, you really have to think about as well.
It's such a good point that, setting the culture from the top, right? And that's just one more thing to learn as you're building a studio that, you don't necessarily get taught. So yeah, makes sense. Really glad that you guys have learned those lessons and are sharing those. 'Cause those are very subtle things, like you mentioned.
Yeah, we had no clue. We had no idea that any of these were going to be like things that we had to think about.
All right. So where do you see bad business going in the next year?
Well, at the moment, we're going to keep grinding away at our bi-weekly updates while we're working on a big content drop and game mode system revamp over the rest of this year and the first quarter of next year. We have plans for improvements to our universal attachment system, which was, like I mentioned, the previous major update we worked on. And we're also working on a reimagination of L's old project Polygons within Bad Business by recreating a bunch of the old content from that game and putting it into Bad Business as well. So we have a bunch of stuff planned.
All right. You have already shared some advice. Is there anything else that you would like to share about managing a live game?
Well, sorry, I shared my original advice. I think that extra advice that I would give is really take time to vet out the people that you are bringing into your team as well. Because like we mentioned, creating that culture from the top in the company, that culture also extends past the contractors and into the community itself as well. And so making sure that your contractors also are like matching with how they should be acting in the community is really important too, especially when we're bringing in new people all the time with LiveOps.
All right, and for developers who are looking to launch a game and get into LiveOps, is there anything that they can do to help prepare themselves for that?
I think that like a general post-launch content strategy that's outlined ahead of time can be really great. You can just like list out some of the major updates that that you want to make, as well as sort of the idea for your content cadence. But nothing will ever fully represent the actual like reality of the situation. So I don't know, if I could go back to prepare, I think I probably would have stressed the importance of tooling for expanding the team later, because that's something that we're running into right now, is that making good tools makes getting new contractors in like 100 times easier, rather than trying to teach people how to do the wonky things that you've been doing for the past 2 years and you've gotten used to it by then.
I feel that one deep in my soul.
Yeah.
All right, great answers, everybody. Thank you. I think that we have just a little bit more time for Q&A if we have any questions left. Kale.
There is one last question. When adding new weapons during a LiveOps update, how do you bounce it against previous content? How do you avoid power creep and watering down of existing content?
There's a couple of different parts of this that we do. One thing is that I think that power creep is like a little overrated and isn't totally always that bad of a thing. We try and keep it to a bit of a minimum, but we also have realized that, people want to have more fun in the game. And as the community finds the fun for the game, maybe that is considered power creep in some ways. But for us, we try and just keep it all in line with the content that's already in the game, kind of use it as a framework for what we're adding in, and then not worry too much about, if it's completely breaking the meta, because we haven't really had that happen in a long time. Especially with like I mentioned before, bringing in the community feedback constantly for balance updates specifically has been a big part of that as well. But then Yeah, no, that's it.
For weapons specifically though, you put a lot of time into designing each one to sort of feel unique and like fit into a certain niche. And then
Yeah,
also like with our attachment system, we also design our attachments to like allow the guns to be sort of pushed even more in those like unique directions.
and
So a
I'll
lot of the
mention.
time,
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say that we also, because of that like variety of the content that we're releasing as well, we're not really watering down our content too much because we have stuff that we know has room to grow, and things that don't have room to grow necessarily, features that we feel are pretty complete in the game. Like for example, I would think like no, I can't say that because we're actually changing that now. Whatever stuff that's like feature complete. I think that you don't have to add new stuff to, and that's part of the reason why major updates are really important in LiveOps, is that you can add new avenues for these content cadence releases as well, so that you aren't always watering down the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, for a long time we were like just releasing guns like every week. And so that it started to get watered down. We switched to like only doing maps for like however long, and people are like, why are we getting so many maps, you know? But now that we have guns, we have attachments, we have maps, we have outfits, we have so many different ways that we can sort of give people content that they're excited about. It doesn't end up like feeling stale.
Good answer. That's all the questions we have. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
All right,
you.
and that's all the questions I have. So we're ready to wrap up, Kale.
Alrighty. Thank you all for attending and asking so many great questions. I'd also like to thank Ruddev, Ethan, and XO for their great roundtable conversation, as well as Missimo and DSPAV for their support on this event. For everyone watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Drop your questions and comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Roblox Developer Relations channel. More level up videos are coming soon.